Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. We've got an amazing rising for you this morning. Rachel Bovard is back. Great to see Rachel.
Hi there.
So in the show today, we've got a fantastic panel. Max Alvarez and Marsha Kosloff will be there. We've also got Brianna Joy Gray on. She's going to update us on the status of Force the Vote. We also have Jeff Stein on, of course, incredible economics reporter for the Washington Post, to brief us on the latest with the stimulus and where we expect to go from here. And that is, in fact, where we want to start this morning. It seems, Rachel, like Mitch McConnell, we can throw this Politico playbook tear sheet up on the screen. McConnell has kind of found a way to get everything that he wants, which is some protection for his vulnerable Georgia senators, a vote on a bill that has all three pieces that the president asked for, but all put together, which makes it a no-go or a poison pill in the lingo of this town for Democrats. So he gets to have the vote that protects his vulnerable senators, but it's not actually going to pass, so he doesn't actually have to do anything for working people, and he technically satisfies the quote-unquote agreement that he apparently had with President Trump.
This, in Washington, is what we call failure theater. It's the appearance of doing something, knowing that will never actually pass, knowing that you never actually have to take accountability for it, and because of that, it allows everybody that you want to be able to vote for it to vote for it because they know it will never pass.
Right.
This is how Washington does business. It's how things get done in the Senate these days, which is pretty sad.
So this is how you end up with something that is wildly popular and has already passed the House with 2/3 support, which is the $2,000 checks, has certainly majority support, if not supermajority support in the Senate. This is how you pretend to care about this thing and raise this thing, but actually ultimately kill it and make sure that it never comes to light. You were talking, Rachel, you're a bit more of an expert on the sort of parliamentarian procedures that are available to both the parties in the House and in particular in the Senate. Do Democrats have any options here? What McConnell's talking about doing is bringing to the floor a vote on the $2,000 checks and repeal of Section 230, which is the tech law, and we're going to talk more about that later, and some bogus like election fraud commission or whatever. He's going to put all of those things together, which again makes it a non-starter for Democrats. Is there any tool that Democrats have available to them at this point that would break those things apart or that would make it so that we could have just a straight up or down vote on the $2,000 checks?
Yeah, so the thing to remember about the Senate is that fundamentally it's very different from the House. The House is set up as a majoritarian institution. The majority gets to tell the minority, this is how it's going to be. They get to crush them with impunity every single day. The Senate is the opposite. In the Senate, almost every member has equal authority. Now, Mitch McConnell, people vest in him a lot of authority. They say he runs the Senate, and he does create the Senate schedule. But each member has the ability to try and move to different legislation, to try and object, as Bernie Sanders is doing, to slow things down. Now, what McConnell has done here is he's put the Senate in a position where right now, they can't do anything except consider the veto override on the NDAA, on the National Defense Authorization Act. But when that is done, he has to then tee up this vote on, this cluster of a bill he's put together. At that moment, Democrats have a few options available to them. If the floor is open, they can proceed to whatever bill they want. They could put their own, they could put the Pelosi checks bill on the floor and try to proceed to that. They could offer an amendment and try to do something called a motion to divide, which is divide their amendment into three separate pieces and get three separate votes. That's called colloquially a clay pigeon. This is the nerd talk that I traffic in here in DC.
That's what we love you for, Rachel.
The point is that senators have far more power than they give themselves credit for. There's sort of a learned helplessness that takes over senators. They forget they have this power. And it will be difficult. Democrats are up against the end of the Congress. Right. The Congress is going to end in a couple of days. The House has already gone home. So even if they were to pass a standalone checks bill, Pelosi would actually have to bring the House back to consider it, which there really isn't any time to do. But if the goal here is to have a clean vote, and again, voting is the most transparent accountability mechanism we have in Washington, there are procedural tricks available to Senate Democrats. They won't be easy, but they are available.
So the Democrat, or I guess technically independent, who's been leading the charge on using some of these tools and playing a little bit of hardball has been Bernie Sanders. He's now been joined by his colleague Ed Markey in saying that they are going to hold up, not provide unanimous consent on this NDAA vote, which doesn't mean that they can stop it entirely. It just means they can slow the process down and hold senators here over the New Year's Eve holiday, something, of course, that they're loath to have to be able to have to do to stay in town and work over the course of the holiday. Senator Sanders was on the floor yesterday making the case for the $2,000 checks. Let's take a listen to that.
We have just passed the largest military budget in the history of our country, $740 billion, more than the next 10 nations combined. And by the way, there was almost no debate about the size of that huge budget. Trump's veto dealt with other issues. Meanwhile, over 500,000 Americans are homeless. Half of our working families are struggling to survive paycheck to paycheck. And in the midst of this terrible, unprecedented pandemic, over 90 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured in the midst of a pandemic, and they're not sure whether they can afford to go to a doctor.
And you know, Rachel, Senator Sanders really deserves a lot of credit from the beginning for forcing this debate, because Democrats were completely willing. Joe Biden and House and Senate leadership in the Democratic Party were all set to go on a relief bill that included $0 checks whatsoever until Bernie and Hawley started really making noise about it. And then Trump jumped in, of course, at the end and has forced this situation that we have unfolding right now. But it's encouraging to hear from you that, you know, if the Democratic Party feigns sort of impotence here, like they can't do anything, that is actually not the case. And at least with Senator Sanders and now, like I said, with Senator Markey, it seems like they are willing to try to play some of that hand, to try to play some hardball to force an up or down vote on, again, a measure that is like remarkably popular. We can throw the next element up here. Polling shows 78% of Americans. Oh, these are the Republicans who actually support the measure, which is a whole separate, which is actually incredible that you have this many at this point going along. And there may be more. These are just the ones that are on the record. Yesterday, both of the vulnerable senators in Georgia came out in favor of the $2,000 checks. But you also have a dynamic where 78% of Americans support $2,000 checks. 78%. So anyone like Paul Krugman telling you, or Larry Summers telling you this is unpopular, this is divisive, et cetera, is really exposing themselves and what is sort of elitist perspective that they have here. Because ultimately this is extraordinarily popular, and Mitch McConnell is doing everything he can to do a pretend vote so it appears like his vulnerable senators are on the right side of 80% of America, when in actuality, he is blocking this move full stop.
Well, what I don't understand is that obviously this is transparently political by Mitch McConnell. You have to think it's related to the Georgia Senate races, obviously. But should that be the case, then why isn't he just proceeding to the $2,000 checks bill? What is more popular than passing $2,000 checks right before the Georgia Senate runoff? That's what I don't understand. And this move has tremendous amount of support in Georgia and also by the two Georgia Republican senators. So it seems that he's working against his own interest, even in this. But I would be loath to say, too, it's not, I don't support what Mitch McConnell is doing, generally speaking, regardless of how you feel about any of these issues. The Senate should be voting up or down on each of these questions. Yeah. That is what we send them to Congress to do. But I think, more than that, this whole process has been politicized from start to finish, right? You saw Pelosi refuse to negotiate with Trump on an even larger package over the summer. She refused that until after the election, and now we're here. So again, I don't want to take away from the fact that this vote is completely constructed as failure theater. We need to talk about that. But it just goes to show that nothing in this town has been genuine for a number of months.
Yeah, Rachel, we'll be the first to admit that there have been very precious few heroes at any point in the entire stimulus negotiation process from the very beginning, by the way. Speaking of anti-heroes, Joe Biden got asked whether he supported the $2,000 checks yesterday. Let's take a listen to his incredibly brave answer here.
Thank you.
Do you support the $2,000 direct payment?
Yes.
So So what's weird is he's the future president. He's the leader of the Democratic Party. And he and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris have been almost completely invisible from this debate, which is even weirder when you consider the fact that actually, rewind to the beginning of this crisis, Kamala Harris, this was the time before she'd been chosen as VP and she was sort of positioning herself for that potential role. She actually offered and signed on to a bill that would provide $2,000 checks for the duration of the crisis. And now when it's actually on the table, we haven't heard anything from her pushing for the idea that she was one of the first to originally sign on to at the beginning. So, in the midst of all of this and all of the bad actors all around and Mitch McConnell being the key villain this week, it's also bizarre that there's been so little leadership or interest in engaging in this debate from the top of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, you really have to wonder what they're playing at because, again, this is the moment where you step into the breach as the incoming leader, not only of the Democrat Party, but of the country itself. This is where you make your priorities known. You support, the leadership of the party you're going to lead. You use this moment to draw a dividing line between yourself, and Republicans. These are all sort of standard political leadership tactics that, Joe Biden seems to be walking away from. But again, this is also, to be honest, Joe Biden's playbook is say as little as possible and hope that no one notices. And you also have to wonder if he's protecting, future goodwill with what may be a Republican Senate. Again, this is Joe Biden, the deal maker. And so maybe he's weighing the costs of, not throwing Mitch McConnell under the bus so he can work with him later.
I think that's exactly what he's doing. And it's an utter and complete fantasy to imagine that him staying mum in this instance is making any difference down the road. I think it's, personally, I think it's an absolute abdication of leadership in a time that is completely critical. Rachel, stick with us and you all too, because I'm going to tell you what's on my radar. That is next.